Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Model Kit Review. In today's fun classic model kit review, we'll be taking a look at the 1/48 scale Hasegawa Mitsubishi A6M5 The Hasegawa kit number is 09460. Hasegawa introduced their then new tool A6M5 in 1999. My particular boxing is from 2003. In this review, I'll give a brief history of the A6M5. We'll take a look at what comes in the box. We will go through the kit instructions, and we'll talk about any potential problems to watch out for during the construction phase of the build. We'll look at the detail that's included on the small parts of the kit. We'll also talk about the fit and the clarity of the clear parts. We'll look at the service detailing on the exterior of the kit, and we'll talk about the fit of the major parts there. We'll look at the marking options that are included in this kit, and we'll talk about the quality of the decals themselves, and I'll give my conclusions at the end. A brief history of the A6M5 Type 52. While the Zero Type 21 fighter enjoyed spectacular success in the early stages of World War II, by 1943 it was being outclassed by the latest American designs, especially in terms of speed and firepower. Following on the heels of the Type 22 and Type 32 airframes, the Zero Type 52, or A6M5, constituted a major overhaul of the basic Zero design in an attempt to bridge this gap. Significant design changes included a 1 meter shortening of the main wings from 12 meters to 11 meters, a complete redesign of the engine cowling, and the installation of thrust-type exhaust pipes. All these factors enabled the Type 52 to increase the overall top speed of the Zero airframe to 565 kilometers per hour. This was 24 kilometers per hour more than the Type 22. Also, the chord of the main wing was thickened to increase maximum sustainable dive speed of the Type 52. In addition, the main wing cannon armament was changed over to a belt-fed Type 99-2 Model 4 20mm cannon. This boxing is for an upgunned version of the Type 52 called the Atsu. The Atsu had a single 13mm machine gun firing through the front cowl in place of the twin 7.7mm machine guns on previous models. The Atsu also carried two additional 13mm machine guns in the wings outboard of the 20mm cannon. Approximately 6,000 of the Type 52 Zero fighters were produced, and they fought on until the conclusion of the war in 1945. Looking at what comes in the box, there are 6 sprues of gray plastic parts, in addition to a sprue of clear parts. I like the way that the Hasegawa color callouts refer to specific paints, and they don't have you mixing paints, as would be the case with a Tamiya kit. Looking at the instructions, in step 1, we are building up the cockpit interior. There's a good amount of detail on the sidewalls and on the instrument panel. I like the way that Hasegawa has provided raised detail for the dials, in addition to decals for the instrument faces themselves. This is a picture of my Hasegawa A6M5 with the same plastic parts, and you can see this turned out really nicely. I made 2 additions to the interior of my A6M2. The first of which was a throttle lever and gun charging lever on the port side of the fuselage. That's the brown part in this picture with the lever coming off of it. I also added some Eduard pre-painted seat belts to the cockpit seat. Moving on to step 2, we are closing the fuselage around the interior. We're also building the engine and attaching that to the cowl flaps in the back, and we're adding the upper gun cover as well. Looking at the upper gun cover, there's some minor flash around these parts. This is the underside fuselage seam. This looks very clean, as does the upper fuselage seam. In step 4, we're building the main wing assembly. This is where I would recommend deviating from the kit instructions. Just setting the upper wing to the lower wing, it looks like we'll be able to get a nice fit between the upper and lower wings. If you attach the upper and lower wings at this time, one potential mistake that you could make is to glue the rib on the inside of the flap area to the lower wing, and this would cause you all sorts of trouble. Instead of gluing the upper and lower wings together this time, I would recommend gluing the upper wings to the fuselage halves first and getting a very good fit here, and then gluing the lower wing to the fuselage and wing assembly at that point. In step 5, we're gluing the wing assembly to the fuselage. We're also gluing on the tail planes and some other detail bits. Looking at the fit of the lower wing to the fuselage, this actually looks pretty nice, and I think with a little bit of dry fitting, you can get a filler-free join of these parts. The same goes for the tail planes. I think you should be able to get a filler-free join on these. In step 6, we're gluing the engine assembly to the fuselage, and we're adding the front cowl assembly to that and the exhaust to that as well. Since the front engine cowl is black on this model, I'll probably leave these parts off until after the rest of the model has been painted. Looking at the 3-piece engine itself, I know it looks a little bit simplified in this view, but once it is painted and installed on the aircraft, it actually looks pretty nice. Once again, this is my A6M2 with the same parts. The front engine cowl itself has a little bit of fine flash in some areas, and it's going to require a little bit of cleanup. Moving on to step 7, we're building the landing gear and the under fuselage fuel tank. These parts look nice once they're detail painted. In step 8, we're adding the flaps and the landing gear and the fuel tank to the underside of the fuselage. There's some nice detail in the wheel wells on this kit. This picture shows the extended flaps. You can see the 2 ejector pin marks that will need to be cleaned up. Unfortunately, these are in recessed areas, which will make this more challenging. In step 9, we're building and installing the propeller assembly. We're also installing the clear parts on this kit. I don't anticipate any issues with this step of construction, and the clear parts on this kit are very nice. They're very clear. The cockpit sits accurately in the closed position and in the open position, and the framing on the cockpit canopy is very petite as well. Looking at the marking guides for this kit, there are 2 marking options included in this kit. Both marking options are for Zeros from the 721st Naval Air Group, based at the Miyazaki Air Base in February of 1945. Both planes are the Imperial Japanese Navy green over Imperial Japanese Navy gray with white wingtips and a black engine cowl. Looking at the decals themselves, these seem to be very well printed. My only complaint here is that the white areas on Hasegawa decals from this era are more of a cream color. Once these are applied, they actually look fairly white, and you can see how the Hasegawa decals performed on my A6M2. They settled down into the panel lines and actually performed very well. Looking at the surface detail on the exterior of the kit, it's represented by very finely engraved panel lines and engraved fastener detail. This kit doesn't have the extensive riveting that the Eduard kit has, but I think overall it should look great once it's painted and detailed. How does this kit compare to the newer Eduard and Tamiya Zeros? Well, I think the Tamiya Zero is going to have about equivalent detail to this one, and I think the Tamiya Zero will be slightly easier in the construction phase than this kit is. This kit does require a little bit more dry fitting to get precise fits, and it does require a little bit more thought and carefulness in the construction phase of the build. When compared to the newer Eduard Zeros, this kit is not as parts heavy as those kits, and it doesn't have as many fine detail parts as the Eduard kit. But the lower parts count of the Hasegawa Zero is offset by the amount of care that you need to take in construction to get a good result. In conclusion, I've built the Hasegawa Zero previously. I think it's a fabulous kit. At the time that I built it, it was the best Zero kit available, and I still think this classic kit holds up very well today. If you have one in the stash, these are certainly worth building, and I look forward to completing my A6M5. Well, I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you out there have built one of the Hasegawa Zero line in 1/48 scale, please let me know in the comment section below. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, model on.